Let's talk supply chain. So welcome to the show, Neil.
Hey, Sarah, it's great to be here. Thank you for the invite and looking forward to our chat.
I'm excited to have you here. I mean, you were recently at Gartner Supply Chain Symposium in Florida, where I heard gave an incredible talk on bridging the digital divide and leveraging technology for frontline efficiency. It's a topic that is on the mind of so many supply chain professionals right now. I mean, organizations are looking for ways to level up, but they really want practical ideas and ways to be able to do that. I think we're done with overcomplicating tech stacks and none of the team really can use, right? Or maybe they're not using it to its fullest potential. And so, I mean, sometimes they're still using Excel. I think it's almost like 60% of people are still using that. So I'm really looking forward to hearing some of the insights you gave in that presentation today and sharing that with our listeners on the podcast as well. So you've been in the industry for over 30 years. You've worked at some big name tech brands, and I'm sure you've seen a lot over that time. So can you give us a taste of your journey through the world of tech? What's changed? What have you learned? And as we stand on the edge of AI revolution, where are we right now?
A great question. And it's a subject I've been passionate about for 30 years. So I think at a very high level, you mentioned it already, is the lack of simplicity, the lack of elegance in a lot of these things. And if I learned something over the 30 years, it's all tied to being able to simplify. And I loved Henry David Thoreau. You know, he goes back 100 years writing about how to live deliberately and how to enjoy your life, but by not having all this complexity. It's the same model here. And that's why he said simplify, simplify, simplify 3 times. Because the whole point was, he said, if I wrote it once, people wouldn't get it. You got to just keep repeating it. And so I think, my stints at these different laboratories, these high-tech labs, whether it was Bell Labs or IBM Research or other places, other research firms I've been with, I think the key thing is people are looking for that moment, that revolutionary where everything changes. And I've had moments in a small piece, but they're all component steps. They're not big chunks. It's not this grand thing. It takes a lot of hard work. And I always loved what Thomas Edison said. It's 99% perspiration and 1% inspiration, right? So you just keep working at it and working at it. I think instead of looking at it as this just massive change that's coming, just as if you take it step by step, you'll get there, and you'll get there with confidence. And I think the confidence is really what carries the day.
It's interesting that you use those two examples around simplicity, but I always remember being told the KISS principle, keep
Yeah.
it simple. And I'm going to say silly, not the other word, because we don't want to call anybody that. But right. So if everybody's talking about keeping it simple, and we've been talking about keeping it simple for so long, why do we human beings feel the need to overcomplicate everything, including technology?
Technology gives us the ability to overcomplicate it on steroids. It's a factor of 2, right? Because there's all different layers to the technology, and where does that complication reside? And is it at the application at the user level? Is it down the network? Is it the database? Is it in the server? And that's absolutely true. And I think that keep it simple, silly, as not the version I grew up with, but yeah, it's so key to everything you do. But the one thing I think people can lose track of, that with doing it, it's a lot more work to keep it simple. It's just like the great professor, right? You had an okay professor that was good at teaching, but you kind of didn't get it 100%. And then you had the professor that was really was a genius on the subject, tore it apart and spit it out in such a simple way. You're like, I get it. It's the same thing there. So really, it takes a lot of work. It takes maniacal behavior to chase simplicity, because every day, to your point, people add in complexity, and they're always like, oh, we could throw this in and we could throw that in. And I kind of always use the analogy that if you're designing a car and there's people in the back seat and they say, hey, wouldn't it be great if we had rearview mirrors on our doors too in the back seat? Because I'd like to see behind us and this kind of stuff. And you pretty much do all these things. And it's like, how did we get here?
Right.
And it's like, well, did you clean all 4 mirrors before you drove away? I mean, it's those kind of things.
And the one mirror is in the way of the other mirror. We didn't really think about that.
Exactly.
Or the canoes or the kayaks that both have the same turn, and then you just keep going around and around.
It's a circle.
But what you also said, I think humans are drawn to drama. And I think the over complexity around technology, I mean, we thrive for that drama, right? But I think the other thing that you said that's really important is that it's a journey. It takes a lot of hard work. and it's a journey and not the destination. Everybody wants to be that person who has that moment, is like, I've solved everything. Everybody stop. I've done it. And that's just not really, that's not realistic or reality. And I think that's not really fun.
Yeah,
Right? As long as
yep.
we get to play with different things and figure out how to keep it simple and keep our supply chains moving and our teams empowered, isn't that kind of the fun in it?
No, you're absolutely right. And if you don't make the journey fun, you're just rushing to get there. Last year, my son, he's at University of Nebraska. So I had to drive from New Jersey to Nebraska. And one of the key things was we each got to pick a place that we wanted to stop. And that takes the pressure off the end state of what you're trying to get to.
Right.
So I had picked the John Deere Museum in Moline,
Okay.
and that was it was my whole focus is like that's where I wanted to get. So we weren't even at the destination. I was like thrilled. It was like, all right, this is awesome. And it's that kind of thing. It could be a milestone. You could view it as a milestone, but I think it's almost like a happiness spot. If you say, hey, if we just get to this piece and then we've got these other pieces along the way, it makes the journey so much more enjoyable, and you're not pressured to be at point B right away.
Wow, I love that analogy. Getting your people involved, figuring out what that happy spot is to get to, that's not so daunting of like, we need to get to the end destination. I love that. So let's talk about sort of that human potential. Because despite the steady technological advancements we've seen, I still believe that supply chain is about people, right? And I think that other industries feel the same as they debate the impact of things like generative AI, for example. But the fact remains that we can't and really shouldn't stop progress. So, what's your vision for integrating technology with human potential in supply chains?
It's funny because I hear things and you see different people's reaction where they love the idea, they hate the idea, and there's a bunch of people kind of in the middle, like, I don't know what's going to happen as a result. It's an interesting thing because I grew up on a dairy farm, so I was always focused on how you could do things a little easier, a little better. Kind of like Henry Ford, that's where he saw the work that you do, and the same thing there. And so I think one of the key things about that was we have to think of as technology as just another tool. So if you think about if you're doing a warehouse, when forklifts were introduced, they augment the people. They don't replace the people, they augment the people. And I think if we think about technology and what's going on there, that's exactly what's happening in the same thing. There's a lot of exercises or things that go on that are very repetitive that machines are built for. At the same time, you're always going to need people because that's how the whole thing really works. We are the glue of everything that's going on, and we are the purpose. It's hard to put passion into a machine. You could do a lot of stuff to it, but passion's a tough one to put in. You'll never replace people, from my perspective. That kind of thing.
It's interesting that you say that because I was listening to the radio last night and they were talking about submitting papers and using AI, or submitting a resume and using AI. And if you're going through that many resumes or that many papers that have been written by AI, you can start understanding which are written by AI and which are actually written by humans.
Yeah.
And it's going to stop that potential if we don't put that human element. And they were like, just use it for a first draft and then put yourself into it, because you're right. We can't put the passion into the AI to write something for us that we might be passionate about. We have to bring that element to the table.
Exactly. And that's a differentiator that people will never lose.
So let's talk about that, because I think that fits into design thinking, right?
Yep.
First of all, what is design thinking? What does that mean? How is it influencing your approach to implementing technology in supply chains?
I'll tie it back together of how I got interested in this. Was we had a bunch of older John Deere tractors, and they were designed by a guy named Henry Dreyfuss. Henry Dreyfuss was a theater stage designer, and he started way back, and these are in the 20s and 30s. And the stuff he was doing on these tractors was genius because you had these farmers who weren't going to complain. I mean, you could have basically hit them with a 2x4 and they wouldn't complain. But some of the handles and the way the throttle and most of the time you're looking backward, all these human elements were slowing things down and also making it more difficult to stay on the track, because the longer you stay on the tractor, the more productive you are.
Right.
So he made farmers way more productive by thinking about how they function and what they do. And that kind of tool really went forward in a big way with other things. So if you fast forward all the way to now and you think about like Apple products and why people are so passionate about Apple, one of the things they do is they thought about the human interaction a lot, and they simplified it by taking out a lot of other things and just made it really easy. So when we think about design thinking, that was done, it's not something new. It's been around forever. And I mean, even if you look at the airplanes and things like that, the stuff that Henry Dreyfuss did for the New York Central train lines in the 20s and 30s is the same stuff we do for jetliners today. Bigger windows, better lighting, depending on changing the lighting. Then it was train lag, now it's jet lag. So if we think about how humans interact with these things, it's really key. So I got into design thing as a kid because I really started to understand what he changed about the tractors I was using.
Mhm.
And I loved it. It was like it made all the sense in the world. I guess there are 5 steps to it. You got to empathize with what the issue is or what the situation is, and then you define the problem. The third one is you start doing ideas and ideate around it, and then you go to prototyping, and then you go to testing. I think sometimes organizations will start at step 3. I got an idea. I got an idea, and I got an idea, and they run off with this idea. Now, this is where I kind of lose it because
That
you got
is
to go.
me.
Yeah, you got to roll back to Edison, right? It's not the inspiration, folks. It's not that 1%. It's the 99% of how you're going to grind it out. And that's where the really defining what you're trying to fix. Because I've sat in many corporate meetings and we're talking about we got the solution, and then you start rolling it around. People are like, well, that's not the problem we're trying to solve. And it's like, wait a minute, hold on. So you do this big circle, and then it's like, all right, we start over. So in those steps, it's really understanding what's happening and then and defining that. And I think those first 2 steps are critical to what you do from there, because then your ideas, then your prototyping and everything else, and you're constantly iterating. And I think that's one of the biggest changes, at least for me, was I was always quick with the idea. I'm just hoping 51% of my ideas are good versus the 49. I'm just hoping to break that. It's like an
Not
investment.
100? I
Yeah,
mean,
but
most people are like 100% of my ideas. I mean, they're pretty good.
no, I'm not that smart. I can't do that. So I'm just hoping I'm better than average.
That's so funny. I think it's also around mindset and how you view things. I go back to this woman in supply chain episode I did years ago with sort of like this Gen Zer that was coming out of school, went to work for HP. And she's like, I love warehouse design because it reminds me of interior design. And if I come to the project with that mindset, then
Yep.
I'm no longer looking at it as just a warehouse. I'm looking at it as full of possibilities. And the design element is kind of endless. But you're right. We probably needed to rein her back in and start with step 1 and 2.
So strangely enough, as a kid, a lot of kids had hobbies of following baseball and the stats for that. I
Uh-huh.
followed all the auto plants in the United States of
Of
what they're
course you
doing.
did.
And it was just who was producing what, how much they were producing, and how it was working. And it was a really strange hobby, but
That's
but it was
awesome.
funny because it's that kind of thing, and I see that as one giant mechanical ballet. And it's
Yeah.
like, how do you organize, and how do you? It's really efficiency at a different level. But when you said that, it was like triggered something.
So let's talk a little bit about how we have challenges around introducing new technologies, right? We've already talked about the people. We've talked about what that design thinking looks like, how we can sort of bring people into the conversation and maybe have those happy stops. But let's talk about it a little bit more, right? Because integrating technology and people is great in theory, but in reality, there's a lot of roadblocks to making that work successfully. I've had some conversations where, you need to be in a meeting and that meeting needs to be uncomfortable to really get everybody on board because people need to feel heard and they need to talk about the fears that they have, the insecurities they have around it.
Yep.
But I
No,
also think on top of that, there's like competency, training, education, time, cost, integration. Like there's a lot. So talk to us about some of the biggest challenges you see when introducing new technologies and kind of the lessons you've learned from those.
So yeah, no, that's super important. And I think if I had to encapsulate one idea first, that kind of becomes the linchpin is process before technology.
Hmm.
I must have heard this 10,000 times over my career. Let's just automate that. We'll just automate it. And what that means is let's just push that away and not deal with it because we don't like what we're doing. We don't think it works right. But if we think we automate, then we take the people out of it that aren't suffering through the process. Because there's a lot of just like ideas, my ideas, there's as many good ideas as there's bad ideas. There's as many processes that are bad and processes that are good. So the
Yeah.
idea is process before the technology. So don't jump to the technology is not the answer.
It's the tool.
It's a tool. That's exactly
Yeah.
right. And so that would be step 1. And I think from there, you take that and you just mentioned the people, right? you want a vocal group that's opinionated. I like opinionated groups. I don't like passive, because what the passive piece to it means that you're going to have that argument down the road, and it's after you already built the car, right? And you want those arguments up front. You want to get that out right away. And I don't mean arguments as a negative thing. It's
Yeah.
just there's going to be different ways to look at things and what you're doing to try to satisfy most of the needs. And notice I didn't say all of the needs, because you will never any economics course will you tell you you will never satisfy insatiable needs, right? It's
Mhm.
just existing. And economics is a key component to, I think, how you think about these things. So what you do is try to knock out most of the needs and really kind of focus that way. But I think process before technology is really the the starting point, the foundation, the cornerstone.
Yeah. So let's also talk about that change management piece, because that's a big challenge for a lot of people, right? Why do you think the workforce resistance is so common? I mean, what impact does it have on the success or maybe lack of success of tech implementations? And how should organizations start thinking about navigating that resistance to technological change? I mean, you just talked about how you need people who are vocal in the beginning. I think it's not only just to make sure that we can get everybody on board and they feel heard, but it's also to make sure that you're investing in the right technology too, right? That it's solving for the challenges and that you're not just looking for that solution and then it's solving the wrong pieces of that puzzle.
No, absolutely. And I think, every organization, every human, every family suffers from, change management, right? There's things that go on that you do, right? You change out a refrigerator and you figure it doesn't fit where the cabinets are and all these kind of things, then you have to move the cabinets. So I mean, these are the kind of things I think whenever we do that, that's part of it. But it's I think the thing I learned the most over the years was to not, when you do a big change, you don't want to save everything for the change. So in other words, I use the moving house analogy. You have people that move and the trucks show up and they don't haven't packed a single thing. They haven't cleaned up anything. Nothing is ready. The clothes are still hanging in the closets and everything else, and the trucks are outside. To me, that's a large ERP change. And
Mhm.
you'll see that with organizations where they do that. And they got everything. It's all going to happen on Tuesday the 18th and that kind of thing. And those are just, you know, those are the most unbelievably bad experiences that I wouldn't push on anybody. But that's exactly when you look at it, that's what's happening.
Mhm.
So I think the key is to push a lot of the human change ahead. And so start packing your things, start cleaning up things, and the most important is throw out the stuff you don't want to bring with you, because
That,
you're moving it all, you're paying to move it. And you're taking
right.
up half a truck of stuff that you're going to throw out on the new side. And it's like
Mhm.
you don't need it.
And
And
nobody
so
wants to do that work, right? But it's important work.
it
And
is.
especially when it comes to data, because there's
Yeah.
so much data coming in. You need good data, not bad data. And
Yeah.
you don't want to take bad habits with you because that trickles down into the organization as well.
Right. Because taking those bad habits is the reason why you're moving in the first place. Right. That's
Okay, fair
the whole
point.
thing. So I'm moving for no reason. But I think when I look at change and I look at what's going on, the other part is my life was okay until you introduced this new system. And then as I changed everything, and then all those cleaning events and all those they get associated with the new system. They're not associated with the new system. They're associated with us cleaning up our old house.
Mm.
And so as we go through that, it's really important to get those things out of the way. So all of that you want to do and that's the pre-work to the launch, because you only want to bring with you what's important and what you're focused on and what the future is. Because a lot of times those systematic changes get the blame for the cleanup, for the packing, for the whole thing. And it's not a fair it's not fair to include that as part of the experience, which it does. But if you
Right.
do it before, it's so much better. So, we just recently did a phone system change, and that was with phone numbers and things like that. And again, we instead of making the changes and reallocating certain things, we did that ahead of time. So they realize that's part of it's not
Mhm.
associated with the new system. It's associated with our old behavior and what we're cleaning up.
And also, let's just put it out there, no one's perfect, right? So if we don't do it perfectly well with one the first time,
Yep.
just make sure you take some learnings from that and implement that into the second one. And obviously listen to Neil.
Yeah. Well, that's where the 51% is, right?
All right. So we talked at the top of this discussion around keeping it simple. So one of the ways, or one of the biggest ways businesses can engage workers is by making the tech truly work for them. So can you talk to us about the importance of simplifying that tech, or of creating simple solutions that empower the workers rather than giving them just another headache, right? Do you have any examples that you can bring to life for us?
Yeah, so there's a couple. One that always comes out to happen is in application design. You're looking at what do you want, how do you want this application to function, and one of the goals is to not have people flipping windows as much as possible. So
Mhm.
I'm over here, I'm over here. I gotta
Uploading, downloading,
it,
uploading, downloading,
it,
upload, right? Like
exactly.
that's kind of a thing right now.
Yeah. Yes, it is, and in and out of systems, right? So I'm going to clean it up outside, and I'll bring it back into the system, kind of thing.
And then what version are we on? Is it version 59, 3? Are you working on the same version as me? I'm not sure.
No, I got the one from 3 days ago. That
Oh,
whole, and then when I do the comma separated input, it's all off by a column, right? But those, I think the key thing is to, again, it's back to simplicity, right? You got to go with Henry David Thoreau on this, and a little bit of Henry Dreyfuss. You got to think of a screen as your real estate. And people, you have to protect that real estate. You can't just say, hey, let's add this in, and let's add those mirrors on the back doors, and let's do this. Because that is the downside of having a group think on things like that, because everybody wants to throw in. What you do is you go for the function, and you think about what really belongs on this page and
mm,
what gets you the most, because less is more. Because if you put too much on there, now I'm going to like 6-point font with legalese and all kinds of stuff on there, and you just lose people. You lose everybody. Lawyers do that on purpose. They
and
want
then
to.
everybody increases the font size as they get older because they can't see it anymore. And then it distorts the page. I mean,
Exactly. So we want to keep it simple. So I think protecting that real estate of that screen and what it does and who it's for is really important. When you start munging in different views, oh, we could do this on the same page and we could do this, it really kind of, you lose the people that you're trying to get. So if you think about a function, you think about you're bridging a digital divide to, people that are very mechanically adept and they know everything about how to fix this. But why do you want to confuse them with all this other stuff that they don't need it? If they don't need it, give them what they need and just what
mm,
they need, and they'll love your app for it. And that's one of the things that I think I'm most proud of, that when I roll out applications, I don't do mandates. It's not you will use this. And what's beautiful about it is I've historically, and I track the numbers pretty diligently, but the nice thing is they've always been above 80% adoption. And that's without the forced, you will use this. Because the thing is, you're using design thinking to think about why do they want to use it and what are they getting out of it, and how much easier it is. So if a mechanic can just pop open his phone and say, hey, here's the 3 parts I need, boom, order it and go, you just made their day from that perspective. You
yeah.
became non-existent, which is what you want. You don't want them to say, "Oh, we had problems with this or that." So
Yeah.
I think it's really all tied to just keeping focus on what they're trying to accomplish, and are you in the way? Are you adding value that can speed up that, make it easier? Right?
Yeah. Well, and that's why you're the chief technology officer at SDI. And we're going to get into some of those technological tools that you're talking about, because we really need to highlight how important it is to meet the needs of the next generation workforce and to not force unworkable tech into businesses, which I think you were alluding to with that last answer. So, talk to us about some of SDI's strategies for adapting technological tools to align with the expectations and needs of the emerging workforce. And I think this is an important question, right? Because we not only have the next generation of workforce, but we have a workforce that is really just expanding in ages, right? It's across ages. You've got people from all sorts of different ages coming together to make things work, and you have to be able to adopt to how each one of them has been introduced to technology as well.
Yeah. No, it's a great question. It is a lifestyle thing. You saw the difference of when I went to high school, everybody basically fixed or built what they drove to high school, right?
Right.
And they were hands, they put it together. Whereas now it's my kids never had to do that. They basically just got in a car and drove there. So I
Right.
think if you use those two as kind of the ends of it, you have the folks who build and fix everything. They just want to get in and out quickly. They don't want all this other stuff involved with it. So they're like the light version or the maybe direct path version. And then on the other side, you've got more folks that are like my son's age who are they want to they want to see videos. All right, how much torque do I need to put on this bolt to tie it in? It's 30 pounds of foot torque, and they want to see a video on that, and they want to see different resources on that, and they want to if they can understand where that part came from and what it actually what it's meant for and how it got from A to B and that kind of thing. So it's a completely different set of requirements that blends. And so one of the key things that we're doing is trying to make it keep that simplicity of almost like a tile format of I need this, I need this, I need this, but it's very organized because I think, having it organized is half the battle. And then once you have that, then you can choose what options you want to use or just not use them. But the thing is, they're using the same platform with the same pieces. So when those generations do come together, they're using exactly the same tool. They're not using something different. Oh, well, I see this and I see this. No, you don't want that. I see the same thing, but I'm just choosing these two windows and you're choosing these four other windows kind of thing. So I think that's the balancing act because there is a lot of space and we're seeing older techs who are really good at, they know the history, and I'm a big history fan. So, but they know the history, they know why it got there and how it got there. And we're losing them at a rapid pace. They're retiring and moving on.
Yes.
And then that's a gap right there that we're trying in a lot of different ways to capture a lot of that information.
Yeah. And so I just want to let everybody know that we did do an episode all about SDI and what they do. And so you can learn more about them. Just go and check out the episode that we did that was at the end of 2023, I believe. So go and check that out to learn more about what they do. But let's talk about how all of that translates into creating operational efficiency and cost savings, right? Because that's kind of top of mind for everybody. What are some of the practical ways that businesses can employ these strategies, especially with a focus on maybe low-hanging fruit, because we all want to make intentional actions that can help us achieve some of those quick wins, right? Some of those happy stops that you were talking about, but also lay the groundwork for success down the line.
I think one of the key things in productivity is and it's part of that happy stop thing. It's tied to confidence. We all, at some point or another, have seen the different tools that have like the screwdriver, all the pieces in it. And it's like, you fold it out, it's got scissors, it's got everything else, the all-in-one sort of tool. Mm-hmm. We tend to do that with software. And it makes it harder when it's in software because you don't see all the angles of it. You don't know all the functionality. And then you get confused of why are there scissors in here? So I think that one of the key things is to make these tools specifically for certain purposes and make it very obvious and so you're simplifying in that direction. At the same way, applications are, when we make them super complicated, people get scared of it and they pull back from it. And it's like it's like a tax, it's like a 1040, not the EZ version, right? And you're looking at your head starts to, go. And I think one of the key things is that confidence. So it's funny because when my kids were young, I'd watch these kids and they get off the school bus and they got these apps and there was no pressure, right? They weren't worried about whether the app failed or not. They were just using this and they'd use it for what it is. They'd move on to something else. And I think that no pressure is the key to learning these things. So because sometimes people would be, they get backed off and they're like, oh, I don't want to look stupid. Like, I worked for one company who the CEO had told me one of the things was they were so afraid of the video conference system because they didn't want to look like a fool trying to set it up. And it was like, I get it. So we made it super simple. We made them all the same. Because just simple things like how many brands of TVs do you have? Well, the remote's different every time. So you're throwing people on purpose, right? And it's like that kind of thing. So that confidence that the kids have, I also noticed in my wife's uncle, who's like 80 something years old. And he jumped right in and he started learning stuff like crazy because he had no downside. There was no part that he was going to look like he didn't know what he was doing. So I think if you can take the pressure down, the learning increases a lot. You do that along with stop with the all-in-one tool and here's a shovel, here's a hammer, here's a screwdriver, and these are all industrial strength tools. You do those two things, and efficiency goes through the roof because
Mhm.
confidence goes through the roof, because the success of the kids and the success of my wife's uncle is all based on their confidence.
Right.
It's really how confident they are. That's why I think kids can tear it apart better than anybody else.
Well, and I think the cost savings just come naturally with that, right? Because ROI is not just about necessarily that bottom line or those dollars that you can tangibly see, right?
Yeah.
That cost savings is going to come in the form of, your employees being more confident and being able to do things faster or do things in a different way or think strategically, bring that creative thinking to the table, which could all result in new revenue streams, right?
Yep.
Reducing redundancies, all sorts of different things that we don't actually see right away. Now, I want to let everybody know, if you want to learn more about SDI, episode 391 and 378, go check that out and you can learn a little bit more about what SDI does. Now, let's talk about digital transformation, which we've been kind of talking about. I also like how we call it big new tech integration. I just recently saw that. And I think that's funny because too many times I feel like we use digital transformation. Everybody gets tired of the words, right? But there's so many considerations. How can businesses maintain that human element? How do they keep the human aspect front and center during the technological evolution of supply chain? Like, why is that so important?
No, it is because we are like we talked about earlier, that the key is the human-centric design, right? Because it's designed for humans by humans, and without that, we lose what we're trying to do. And we just, if you think, we just talked about productivity, happy employees are naturally more productive. If you give them an application that doesn't understand their job and they're beating their head against a rock every day, there's a natural, loss of horsepower, right?
Right.
We're draining the horsepower. But meanwhile, if you have them happy and they feel that this application understands who they are, they understand their job that they're doing.
Mm,
They're like, this is a great tool, and they want to use it more. And the really funny thing is, you mentioned before, which is really perfect, that all the information coming get downloaded, reworked, and then re-uploaded, right?
eh,
The biggest complaint from people on my side, which is the technology side, is, well, you're not using the system, so we can't tell you what searches you're running or what things are happening, or that. As soon as people take it out of the system, all that work gets lost, all that effort gets lost. So
mhm.
having it in the system makes the company more productive. And
Yeah.
so all these things come together. So I think really that human-centric design of understanding what the role is, what they're trying to accomplish, and again, not trying to add all these other things. Hey, wouldn't it be cool? The hey, wouldn't it be cool stuff, I think we throw out probably 95% of that, right?
Not the 49%, because your
Yeah, that's
51% of
and
ideas
and I'm
go
guilty
through.
of that, right? And I, like I said, now I'm not saying I'm always 51. Sometimes I'm on the 49 side of the good ideas. But that's exactly what you have to do is, and that's what takes work, because it's so much easier for technology people to say, we can add that, we can add that. They become this bakery that decides to make lobster tail and everything else, right? It's not meant to do that. And so part of that is controlling all those pushes and saying, hey, wait a minute, do we really, really need that? And that's where the economics comes in. I was thrilled my son is going for economics. I was like, dude, you're going to understand all the pieces of how to balance this insatiable need thing.
You're
And
so excited for him.
yeah, I am. It is kind of funny because it's because we have these arguments all the time about things like this. So it helps though. But
Yeah.
you get to understand how different generations think and how they view technology, right? It helps
Yeah.
me.
So let's talk a little bit about the future, or kind of maybe like the next year or so. How do you think companies are going to try to continue to bridge that digital divide? And are there any new trends or maybe innovations that we should look out for? And what will SDI be doing over the next year or so to continue to help customers simplify and leverage technology for frontline efficiency?
So yeah, no. So I think one of the keys there is really understanding the roles that we're supporting with our software. So in other words, we're not software designers sitting in a bubble and saying, "Oh, this is the way it should work." We're actually understanding the real events that are going on and what's happening, and how to, our mobile app versus on the desktop. We know
Mhm.
that managers tend to use the desktop, whereas the mobile app is tended to use by people in the field, right?
Right.
So we adjust some of those things in a big way. Now, sometimes in the field, the guy will be be in a truck and they'll use it in a truck or maybe more of a laptop. But it's those kind of things of understanding how they're using it. And if you think about like the phone for techs that are in the field, the phone is absolutely genius. Well, it's not a phone anymore, but it's got the camera. It's got when you think about all the technology coming together that came into those devices. So you got the flashlight, you got the camera, you got which the camera enables visual detection, which is something AI what we're working with to understand. Can you identify parts and can you identify parts that are stressed? Those kind of things. So when you have this tool that's really there, us taking full advantage of it is really key. And that I think is one of the pieces that again keep it simple, keep it as and focus on what it does. Don't try to be everything to everybody.
Yeah, it's so true. And you can't be everything to everybody. And I talk to a lot of tech founders. And, in the beginning, everybody's giving you feedback and they're like, I want to see this and I want to see that. But when the tech company decides to focus
Yeah,
on what exactly they want to be doing, that's when the markets sort of open up and they dictate their path versus somebody else dictating their path. So,
exactly.
so technology is advancing so quickly, and organizations need to bridge the gap between it and people, and it can seem overwhelming. But businesses should try looking at the problem from a different perspective. By applying a design thinking lens to your approach, you could discover more simple tech solutions, as well as how to use them to empower frontline workers, boost efficiency, and save money. And by working with a partner like SDI, you can gain access to smart, intuitive tools that are the perfect fit for the next gen workforce, helping to make your supply chain more resilient, innovative, and ready for tomorrow. Did you have a guess at today's big question? Well, at the top of the show, I asked you, many businesses across the industry are investing in multiple technologies to digitize operations. But according to PwC's 2024 Digital Trend in Operations Survey, wow, that's a mouthful. What percentage of operations and supply chain officers say tech investment haven't fully delivered expected results? Well, it's a huge 69%. I wonder if those results would have improved if organizations had used design thinking and worked to simplify their tech whilst maintaining the human element. If you'd like to find out more, you can check out SDI at SDI.com. And a massive thanks to Neil for joining me on the show today and to the team at SDI for making this episode happen. Neil, thanks so much for sharing all your insights.
Sarah, thank you. And thanks for the great conversation. I really enjoyed it. And I look forward to our paths crossing again.